Okay, so I got this email from one of my clients, and her question was so good that I was like, as I was typing my explanation and reply back, I was just like, you know what, this needs to be a video. I am trying to be really good about making a bit more kind of off the cuff content so that you guys get to see in real practice what healing trauma, whether it's the mindset work of trauma, the nervous system work of trauma, the spiritual work of trauma, looks like in real time. So if you're new here and you're watching this and you're like, what is this girl talking about? My name is Hannah. I am a trauma coach and nervous system coach for Muslim women. So this is what I do. I help Muslim women heal from complex trauma. I just, as I'm filming this video, just finished up a cohort of like 28 women who went through my group coaching program. And you guys, subhanAllah, the results are, when I say mind-blowing, I wish people understood what that experience is like, to know what they were living with on a day-to-day basis before they came into the program and what life looks like for them now in only 3 months. In only 3 months. Like, these are women who have been in therapy for years, or some of them have been in therapy for years, who have put so much time, energy, and money into healing. And in 12 weeks, we were able to get them to achieve what usually takes years. And this is what happens when you do things the right way. So I'm going to pull up, let me just bring my laptop closer so I can, inshallah, make notes about what it is. You know what, actually, I'll just pull it up on my phone. So give me a moment, inshallah, to pull it up. So essentially, just to give you kind of a basic outline, this sweet client, it was basically telling me that she was going through Surah Yusuf. She was reading the translation to get a sense of the story, and something that she was confused about was essentially the fact that in the beginning of the surah, there's a description, or kind of the acknowledgement, that Yusuf alayhi salam had brothers who were jealous of him. And more so, the understanding is that Yusuf alayhi salam was favored. And she described this as a form of rejection and desire to have a parent in the case of father's love and attention and feel wanted. And she was trying to understand, how do you reconcile this idea of Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, so Yusuf's father, favoring one child over the other despite being a prophet, and the fact that there is so much anger and frustration that comes when you're dealing with favoritism, and sometimes that leads to emotional neglect. One, your parent favoring one child over the other, praising them more, giving them more attention, more love, more connection. And how do we reconcile that? And then also, I think this was kind of implied, would that then kind of make sense that they were that angry to do what they were doing? And so it was really, really cool, because what I saw as a question from this sister, and this is something a lot of people, when they're reading the Quran, these questions come to mind, these little subtleties, kind of like the whispers of shaitan, of like, maybe think about it like this, what if this is happening? And it's easy to just shut it out and not even reflect on it, because you're afraid that it might take you down a rabbit hole of doubting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is something, actually, another client of mine who I had a one-on-one session, she was kind of talking about like a spiritual awakening. She feels she's becoming more, she was already very practicing, but she's feeling even more intentional about the way she shows up as a Muslim woman in her day-to-day life. And it was just really cool to see that, even she, someone who was practicing, who knew the deen, from what I can tell pretty well, was having these doubts. And she was like, sometimes I come across things in the Quran, I'm like, I don't even want to look at it, because I feel like it's going to make me doubt Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Here's one thing that I just want to say, even before getting into the details of Prophet Yusuf's story, is if you are someone who is afraid to delve into the details of your deen for fear that it is going to make your iman weak, then you've already lost a battle. Because here's the thing, as Muslims, we believe wholeheartedly in the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's not a thing in the Quran that I look at and I ever feel like, oh my God, if I learn why this happened, my iman is going to be weak. Because that's essentially placing on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the limitations we place on ourselves, making it seem like, oh, if it doesn't make sense to me, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might have been cruel about it or unjust about it. And do you see how that line of thinking can really disrupt the way your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes? Rather, in our deen, we're literally encouraged, you're supposed to ask questions, right? And you're supposed to specifically seek out answers from those of knowledge. Ahl al-dhikr is how the Quran describes it. But no, those of knowledge and piety, so who have a combination of both, because they can give you the answer that would help you to understand kind of the wisdom, but also make sure that they're doing it in a way that your iman isn't damaged. So, side note that I say that, and this is something we keep in mind for the story. Does it make sense that a prophet favors one child over the other? I'm sure there are so many people who have thought about this, even in underlying thought, not even realizing it. And here's the thing to understand about the story. This isn't a story of emotional neglect. When you hear the idea of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam being favored, this isn't Prophet Yaqub is only spending time with him alayhum salam, and showing him love and praising him and taking care of him and ignoring his other children. That is not befitting of a prophet. The way that we understand prophethood in Islam is very different. Sometimes what we do is we take the Christian kind of idea of prophethood and we place it on our prophets, and it just leads to a train wreck, because the point is, if you understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose someone to be a prophet, then you have to understand that they were the pinnacle of good character, of mercy, of justice, the highest level of that. So to even think by that standard that Prophet Yaqub was capable or willing to emotionally or physically or mentally neglect any of his children, it doesn't even fit. And so this is kind of a more of an emotional response, because we hear and we're like, oh, favoritism, that must be bad. In actuality, Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam was going to be a prophet. And what do prophets need? They need mentorship from other prophets. Even when you look at the stories of other prophets, you hear Ibrahim alayhi salam with Ismail and Ishaq alayhim salam, and the idea of Musa alayhi salam coming to Midian and coming across this wise man who some say might have been Prophet Shu'aib. Mentorship is so important. The Prophet alayhi salatu salam, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, talks about how he has kind of that mentorship with the prophets as well, with Ibrahim alayhi salam, who he refers to as his father. So when we hear favoritism, and I don't exactly even know what the wording is. I didn't even pull up the verses, but I just want to give you guys the insight into this. It's not favoritism in the way that we think about it. It's not a nafs-based favoritism. This is a man who is going to become a prophet. You need to learn certain things from the prophet who happens to be your father. And that means you need to learn your book. You need to learn character. You need to learn prophecy. You need to learn how to give da'wah, how to understand people and dynamics, so you know how to actually interact. And that was perceived as favoritism. Okay, so be mindful of that, number one. Number two, the idea of now they're frustrated at their favoritism. Doesn't that make sense? And I think so many people might be able to relate to that experience of, if I'm emotionally neglected by my parents, or am I not going to be overwhelmed? We've already cleared up that this was not emotional or physical neglect. Part of the issue is that what we are seeing here, and what oftentimes Shaitan can do in the process of kind of trauma and healing, is that he can make you perceive your emotions and your experience and your perception of what is going on as the sole truth. But in reality, our perception is not this objective, all-knowing truth. It is subjective. It is based on several circumstances. It is based on our own kind of emotional understanding of things, our own limiting beliefs, our own previous experiences and circumstances. I had one client, it was so funny. She was kind of talking to me about, she felt that her sister was the golden child in their family, the one who was favored and obsessed over. And her sister felt that she was, the one. So clearly somebody is wrong, because you can't both be the golden child. The golden child is one person in the family system. That's a kind of a whole other conversation. But the point is, perception is not the truth. And so when we're doing the work of healing, this is why I treat it like a science, because I want to bring some objectivity. I want you guys to be able to say, oh my God, wait, Hannah, yeah, you're right. The way I was seeing it might not have been the way what actually was happening. And so in reality, what ended up happening for Yusuf alayhi salam's brothers is that they were leading with their nafs. Their anger and their frustration, it wasn't that they were angry and frustrated out of a justifiable reason. They were jealous. And part of the story and the wisdom of the story is it actually is an insight into the way jealousy can completely destroy a person spiritually inside out, to the point that they were willing to quite literally commit murder. That is not a small feat. That is not a small idea in someone's head. Willing to do that because of how jealous they were. And they could have justified it any which way. It still was never justifiable. And I want to say it's a hadith in regards to the idea of jealousy burning up good deeds like fire burns up wood, because that's what it does. It leads us to distort our thinking. We start getting these very rigid ideas about things. We're very black and white in our thinking. We start to assess and assert blame onto people who sometimes are blameworthy and sometimes they're not, but it was never about what was actually in front of you. It's about this burning feeling in your heart, which is why our deen tells us to be so mindful about managing jealousy from the very beginning when it happens. The other side of things to note here is that they go about their time and they do what they did. And if you go on to read the story of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, then he's thrown into a well. They're essentially throwing him there hoping that nobody discovers him, but ultimately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan is greater. He is discovered. He's sold into slavery. Again, the story, I'm not going to detail the entire story here. If you don't know the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam's story in detail, go read it. It is known and defined as the best story in the Quran because of the nuances and the plot twists and so many incredible lessons. But we know, just to kind of further the point here, that in actuality, Yusuf alayhi salam's brothers, his half-brothers, his half-siblings, actually knew that they were not justified, because at the end of the surah and the description of what happens, they come to an acknowledgement that Yusuf alayhi salam is still alive, and they're not angry about it, and they're not like, oh my God, our plan was foiled. In fact, they have come to regret their actions and their behaviors already. So they came to terms with it, right? With, oh my gosh, my dad wasn't favoring Yusuf alayhi salam. He was training Yusuf alayhi salam. And even if there is a greater, you can't control the whispers of your heart, right? Even if there was a greater love and kind of attentiveness that Yaqub alayhi salam had, that's something that, parents who are watching this, you kind of know, sometimes there's just like a child that pulls at your heartstrings in a very different way. You love your children, but in different ways as well. Yusuf alayhi salam had an impeccable character as a child. He was the kid that just, Yaqub alayhi salam is looking and knowing that this is going to be the one who carries on my legacy. And that just brings a different level of lightness to the heart of a parent, of a father especially. And so that might have been what was being reflected as well. So I just wanted to share my reflections on here because I just need to get a video out for Friday. And I just thought this was such an interesting kind of note to take. It's not a video that I typically do, but something I hope will encourage you that when you're coming to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, come to it with curiosity. And don't be afraid to ask your questions. And also just be mindful of how Shaitan tries to manipulate our thinking. To essentially, had she, for example, gone down the rabbit hole with this and allowed her feelings and her perception to be the way that she looked at this story moving forward, she might have gotten to a point where she, wa'iyad billah, ended up thinking that Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam was being unjust and had wronged his sons, which is not true. Is objectively not true. You're talking about a prophet. You're not talking about me or you or kind of a everyday human being. You're talking about a prophet who, had he done a wrong in that way, would have been held accountable immediately by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. So anyways, if you enjoy this kind of story style, let me know in the comments. I'll try to come on here and do this a little bit more often, just to give you guys something a bit more objective to chew on and start training your brain to start being able to do this as you come across different stories and experiences. And also, if you are looking to, inshallah, do the work to heal your trauma as a Muslim woman, go to the link in my description to learn more about my trauma group coaching program. The next cohort, by the way, launches in May. I'm doing an emergency cohort because there was such a high demand, and the April cohort completely booked out. It's closed. You can't get a spot. May, inshallah, cohort is open, so you can, inshallah, go get the details on my website, link in the description. So nice talking to you guys. Assalamu alaikum.